It's our next speaker, Ella Yates from Glasgow. She's going to talk about temporal role coloring.
Thank you. Okay, temporal role coloring. This is work with my supervisors, Jess and Kitty, and with Puck. Okay, so unsurprisingly, I'm starting with coloring. I'm sure you guys have seen some graph coloring stuff before, but I just want to make it clear that when I talk about coloring, I'm not talking about proper colorings. I don't care if two vertices next to each other have the same color. Well, sometimes I care, but generally it doesn't matter to me. So both of these up here are colorings. They're just assignments of colors or labels to our vertices. Specifically, unsurprisingly from the title, I care about role coloring. And so for me, a role coloring is assigned by a smaller graph R, which says what the roles are. And then you apply that to your larger graph so that if something has been assigned a role, all of its neighbors have roles that are neighbors of the role graph. So a nice, easy example for that is if your role graph is just these two vertices with two different colors, then you can color your big graphs by this role coloring graph R if they are two colorable in this way. So our first graph, you can role color. And it's worth noting that it doesn't matter the number of vertices in your neighborhood that have these roles. So our bottom white vertex only has purple vertices, but has two purple vertices, whereas our top one has three, but they're both colored by the rules and we're happy. Whereas you can quite easily look at the second graph and say that you can't role color that because you have triangles and you can't two color something with triangles. A nice fun example of this is if I talk about people who might work or people who might be at a restaurant. We might have customers, it's just a nice C, waiters, kitchen staff, and managers. And then the customers will probably only interact with the waiters, whereas the waiters will be interacting with the customers and bringing them food from the kitchen, and they'll be told off by their managers when they do things too slowly. And we also allow loops, so our kitchen staff, we're hoping, will talk to each other. And then our second graph shows a coloring that follows these rules. So we have 5 customers and 3 waiters and 2 people in the kitchen talking to each other and 1 manager looking after all the staff.
Sorry, quick question. Is that the closed or open neighborhood? So do you require that the kitchen staff has another neighbor that is also kitchen staff, or is it allowed to count itself for the self loop?
We require that it has another neighbor.
Thanks.
So that's why we don't have loops on any of the other vertices.
Gotcha.
But obviously, this is a temporal graphs workshop, so we need to think about the temporal problem. And just to make sure we're all talking the same language, here's my definition of temporal graphs. I'm not using T for the lifetime, just to be confusing, using lambda. And I'll often talk about the snapshots of the graph. So we have our underlying graph with the labels, but then we also have a snapshot for each time. So our snapshot at time 1 has, hopefully, if I've drawn it right, all of the edges that are labeled time 1. So now we have everything we need to start thinking about temporal role coloring. So our temporal role coloring question takes a graph and a K-color role automaton and asks, does G admit an A role coloring? And what does any of this mean? What is a K-color role automaton? And what does admitting an A role coloring mean? So we'll start with what the role coloring is. So in our restaurant example, if you're a customer, at some point you might decide, actually, I want to work at this restaurant. I love this restaurant. I would love to be a waiter here. I want to work here. But you're not allowed to just show up and put on the uniform and have the job. So to change roles, you have to do something. And probably what you'll need to do is be interviewed by a manager. So to change from a customer to a waiter, you're going to have to interact with a manager. And so our transitions in our automaton are labeled by, I know this is huge, I'll talk through it, are labeled by sets of colors in the neighborhoods. So the automaton definition is as follows. Our input alphabet are these sets of colors in the neighborhood. So this is, if you've seen the manager, you can change to being a waiter. But it might be if you see, everyone all at once, then you can move to your next role. Like, and we have states which tell you, what your current role is, but can also provide some extra information. So if you're a customer who's been interviewed by a manager, you might not immediately start your job as a waiter. You might still be a customer for a while, but now you have the potential to change to being a waiter when you want, because you've already been interviewed. We have a set of accepting states. So these are the states that we need to be in at the end. A start state, which doesn't have a color associated to it, and everything else has a color to match with the role coloring of it all. And then our transitions between states are labeled by the colors that you see in the neighborhood. And by you, I mean vertices. So an example of a role coloring automaton is shown here. And we have some rules. We see at most one color in the neighborhood each time. So although some of the edges are labeled with lots of things, this is like if you see blue or you see nothing or you see red. And you start with either color. So our epsilon transitions, these are changing spontaneously. So we don't require a time step before you first have a color. And so you can start either red or blue. If you're red and you see another red, this down arrow means you immediately turn from red to blue. If you're blue and you see another blue, you can turn straight back to red, or you can move into this other blue state, which is our like blue but has seen blue state. And from then you can stay there as long as you want. I don't know why I'm saying it like the vertices have a choice in this, but you can stay there as long as you want and then move into red. And we want everything to be red at the end. And hopefully you convince yourselves, or I've helped a tiny bit, that this automaton does what these rules say. And so if something can be colored by this automaton, then they'll follow these rules. And what does it mean to be colored by the automaton? Well, our temporal graph admits an A role coloring if it has a temporal coloring, so that's a coloring that assigns a color to every vertex at every time. So you might be the vertex might be a different color at each time, such that for every vertex, the word that's made up of the set of colors in its neighborhood at time 1, the set of colors in its neighborhood at time 2, all the way to the set of colors in its neighborhood at the final step in the lifetime, is an accepting word in the automaton. So that means it ends in an accepting state. So in this case, it's in our red state, such that the states that it goes through have the same colorings as the vertex. So we're not moving the vertex through the automaton with no care of what color the actual state it's in is. So I'll give an example to make that a bit clearer. Here is our graph from earlier, and here it is as snapshots, and we add this ending snapshot. So this is when we want everything to be red. This is our things have gone right, and we're in an accepting state. And the question is, does it have a coloring such that the temporal graph admits an A role coloring? Yes, here it is. And I'll talk you through a couple of the vertices to try and convince you that it is. So this vertex here, this is the word of its neighbors. So you can see that at time 1, all of its neighbors are red. At time 2, all of its neighbors are blue. And at time 3, all of its neighbors are blue. And then it moves through the automaton, first on the epsilon transition to this red state. You can see it's colored red, so we're okay so far. And then from our red neighborhoods, it means it immediately turns blue. and moves to that blue state at the bottom. And now it has blue neighbors, so it has the choice to either turn back to being red or moving to this blue plus state. And you can see that in time 3 it's red, so it moves back to being red. And then it has a blue neighbor again, and it has this loop on the red state that's labeled with blue, keeping it red and staying where it is. And that is an accepting path through the automaton with states Q1 to Q lambda plus 1, such that the colors match up to the coloring that we've given of the temporal graph. And that's true for all of the vertices. I won't talk you through them all, but here is a coloring R that gives and that means that G is a roll colored. Okay, hopefully I've explained what the question that we're talking about is. And so now we start thinking about answers to the question. It's maybe not surprising that this question is hard. There's quite a lot of build up to it. And actually, the R roll coloring problem is NP hard. So to prove that our problem is also NP hard, we give a reduction from the static problem. So to do that, we take a static graph, and for every vertex in our static R roll coloring graph, we make 2 states in a new automaton, one that is the input and one that is an accepting state, and you can move between these two if the neighbors are exactly the neighborhood in our roll coloring graph. So our purple in R sees purple and sees white, so the transition is labeled by the set purple and white. And so you can see that the temporal graph that is exactly one lifetime and is the static graph that we're given means that if you have the static graph and the roll coloring graph R, it's a yes instance if and only if this exactly the same temporal graph and our new automaton is a yes instance. So here's our reduction, and it's hard. So then we have to contend with this difficulty. And to do that, we start thinking about parameterized complexity and parameters for which, if they're small, the problem can be solved more efficiently. So the first parameter we do this for is vertex interval membership width. And this is a temporal parameter, and it says, for each vertex, look at the time in which it first has an edge to it, and look at the time in which it last has an edge to it. And this is its active interval. So, for example, our vertex A has an edge at time 1 and an edge at time 4. So it's considered active from time 1 until time 4. And you look at this for every vertex. And then the Vim width, the vertex interval membership width, is the largest number of vertices that are active at the same time. So in our time step 3, we have 5 vertices that are active, even though we only have 2 edges, but 5 vertices that are in their active period. And so our vertex interval membership width is 5. And so this is good for very sparse temporal graphs. And so we give an FPT result for this parameterized by the vertex interval membership width and also the number of states in our automaton. The next parameter we look at is a generalization of this, called the tree interval membership width, which is similar to the Vim width, but also considers connected components. So our top bag at time 2 of A, B, and E. Well, vertex B has an edge at time 2 to E, so will be affected by E. And vertex E will have been affected at time 1 by A. And so these feed into each other. But B has never seen anything that's happening in the C, D, and F part of the graph at this time. And because our problem is so much about adjacencies and connectedness, it's all about the colors in the neighborhoods. We don't care what's happening in a completely different connected component of the graph. So we can use this parameter to give ourselves a FPT result, again parameterized by the number of states in the automaton as well as the tree interval membership width. And our final parameter is one that you're probably a bit more familiar with, which is the tree width of the graph. And we use the tree width of the underlying graph. And then by a classic dynamic programming technique, we get an FPT result parameterized by the tree width, the lifetime, and K, which is the number of colors of the automaton. And K can be a lot smaller than the number of states. So you can imagine that we have lots and lots of states that are all colored the same color, but we only care about the number of colors that are used. So this is slightly nicer to use K than to use rho. Okay. And that is the end of my talk. Hopefully got us a bit of coffee break still. And this is a very new thing that we're looking at. We think we're the first people to have defined temporal role coloring. It's fun to look at the temporal equivalence of a static problem. So I'm really open to any comments or questions or thoughts about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ella. George, you have a question?
Hello. No, I wanted to applaud. It was a mistake.
Okay. Any questions from the online audience? Okay. Any questions from the offline audience?
Hello. Have you tried to use these automatons to characterize some simple temporal graph classes? Because you mentioned, I mean, I'm not so familiar with role coloring also in the static case, but you mentioned that it's easy to characterize bipartite graphs with it.
Pardon? Sorry?
You mentioned it's easy to characterize bipartite graphs in the static case. So did you think about whether there are temporal graph classes that can be characterized by easy automatons? I don't know, like proper, or is this something that you think would make sense to try out?
We've not thought about it, but I think it's an interesting question. I mean, I imagine, so it's quite a general definition, but I imagine for more restrictive automata, you could find quite interesting properties of graphs. So you probably could use them to classify.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you. I also have a quick question. I might have missed something, but did you look at the specific automatons, how this affects complexity? So if you restrict the automaton.
So no, we've looked only very generally, but that so there's some classes of R role graphs where the problem isn't NP complete. So we have thought about the fact that we would like to think about for what kinds of automata the question might be easier. But so far we've not looked at it at all. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.